morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Let's pick up the energy a little bit. Thank you for being here. For the most part, I'm going to talk about two topics that we thought warranted a little more discussion than some of the materials we will put out. And the first one will be the eviction moratorium and our policies, and sort of not just the answer, but the algebra behind it and what we're trying to do with our new executive order. And the second one we want to talk about is the use of the ruse, and I'll talk about some restrictions on what I should or should not say, but I want to have a very open and transparent dialogue about that. Following my words, Councilmember Herbold will say a few words, and again I want to thank the City Council and Councilmember Herbold for leading some discussions yesterday at a public hearing, listening to testimony, again looking at what had occurred during the Chop Chaz situation. Chief Diaz is here. For the most part, he and I have had many conversations, and because of some legal restrictions that I'll address when I get to the ruse part, I'm going to start with the moratorium. I'll sort of better talk about some of the restrictions that by law he are under with respect to what he can and cannot say. So let's talk about the eviction moratorium, and let's sort of set the table for the hand that we're dealt right now. First, the spread of the Omicron variant, we know now, is at a staggering rate. Everyone is aware of that, but you look at the actual numbers, new cases equaling over 15,000 per day in Washington State. That's an increase in 4,000 in just one day. The number of new cases is far higher than any previous point in the pandemic. And a wave of new cases is still yet to peak, and I think many of us are waiting for the science and the scientists to sort of tell us when the peak will be. And I read the news as much as you do. I read what you write, and there could be some good news at the horizon about the spiking and going down. So we're optimistic, but we're cautiously optimistic. In King County, the 7-day average case rate is more than 4 times the county's previous peak. The number of hospitalizations caused by COVID-19 is up 5-fold since mid-December and now exceeds any of the previous peaks. So with that context, certainly this is not over. So I guess if there's any good news out of those, the facts that I just described, is that we have some data to look at in terms of the eviction moratorium. So we have made a decision to extend it for a 30-day period. There's been many extensions in the past. I think the first moratorium started right around the March timeframe. March 3rd is when it was declared, and I think many of you know the history of when it was renewed many times. But our new executive order wants to do a few things. We want to see the effectiveness. We want to make sure that we're keeping people housed that should be housed. We want to make sure that that we're not going to lose many rental houses with a slew of just sales at the end of the moratorium. We want to make sure that both landlords and tenants understand and that with the city are prepared to deal with and mitigate damages for both tenants and landlords. And so there's a few things that we're going to do. I am asking that our many departments, first of all, streamline and coordinate the distribution of available funds, the acquisition of funds, to make sure that it's crystal clear where there is relief. Our preliminary studies, and again, we've had 8 days to really have sort of a control and influence of the departments. Our preliminary data suggests that a lot of this data that we will need to make very solid decisions, the city just doesn't have. They haven't compiled the kind of data we'd like to look at. So I'm going to go through a few things we want to look at. We want to look at ways we can, again, better understand both the effectiveness and the consequences of the moratoria. Is it working? How well is it? How many people have actually taken advantage of the protections? How many people have not? We would like to make sure that we develop an online portal where tenants and small businesses can find available resources that in our discussions with many tenants and many landlords that, again, it continues to be a maze, and we think the city's role should be to make it very easy for people to access the funds. We want to, again, coordinate with our Office of Intergovernmental Affairs the evaluation and our ability to receive funds. And I think many of you know I spent some time a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and we want to look at, again, federal, state, and county funds and make sure that, particularly in this Seattle, that we are a recipient, because our people here are hurting. Many of them are hurting. And so we're going to improve our efforts there. We will continue to allow flexibility and no shutoffs policy from Seattle Public Utilities and Seattle City Light. We can't have people without power and water when it's caused by COVID-related problems and financial challenges. With respect to that, I'm asking the utilities not just to implement that policy, but what I don't want to see 6 months from now, 1 year from now, is a spike in rates. That could be devastating as well. So I need to understand, working with the City Council, an evaluation of what our policies will do, and then we could get very creative, as we have in the past with our rate stabilization account, selling surplus properties, temporary surcharges. We'll get creative, because what we don't want is a spike in rates that we know will hurt, particularly people of limited means or low income. So embedded in our executive order are several protections that we want to make sure that now that we have the data, we want to use that data to the benefit of everybody. The last part I think I'll talk about is the education piece, particularly for tenants and small landlords. There's an educational piece that often we have found, and again, this is a result of having many discussions with tenant advocates and tenants and small landlords, that there's a few problems that have occurred even during the moratorium. One would be a tenant to be handed a piece of paper and he or she may not even know what it means. Is it an eviction? Is it just a warning? And so we want to make sure that people understand their communications between the tenant and the landlord, that they're accurate, so that there's no bullying going on, there's no misleading information going on, but again, that system works. And we again want to establish a working group with 3 tenant advocates and 3 small landlords, and there's no magic to that. I just didn't want 100 people in the room trying to figure out good policy. So we're going to look at working again with the council on where we can fix some of the problems that have arisen in past practices. We just don't want to, quite frankly, in the Harrell administration, we just don't want to blindly continue things without looking at data and information. So again, working with the council and community activists and small landlord representatives, we're going to come up with some plans that we think will have a very data-based approach on how we move forward. I think many of you know, and this will be the last part I will talk about on the moratorium, many of you know that it will extend for 6 months even beyond my decision. So looking at, had I simply not extended it, it would have still been in effect, at least for some of the protections for COVID-related non-payments or financial non-payment situations, till the end of July. And so in essence, we still have many months going to August to sort of figure this out. At the end of the day, here's our value. We can't have anyone suffer homelessness because of financial challenges given the situation we're in. That is our underlying value. We also want to make sure that we are working with small landlords and some of the pain points that they may have. Again, many of them have mortgage payments as well, and taxes and insurance, and that's why we're emphasizing the part of what the city could do to help not just tenants but small landlords at all. And again, you know, people love to talk about how well our administration will work with the council. Well, you know, I hope I'm not out of line for saying this, but Councilor Herbold, more than the council member, is my friend. And I have friends on the second floor, and that's why when I'm setting up a series of meetings with them, the first thing I will say is, hey, do you want me to come down to 2? I missed 2 a little bit, so I will say, I'll come down to your floor and let's figure this stuff out together. Okay, I know you may have some questions on that, but if I could ask you to hold them. Now I want to talk about the use of ruses, sort of a hard shift to another subject. I personally asked Omar Salisbury to be here this morning. I want to thank Omar for being here. I just saw him. He's back there. He's always in the back. I want to thank you for your work. The fact of the matter is if it wasn't for his work, we probably wouldn't be talking about this today. I don't want to give him all the credit, but I'll give him the lion's share because he and many activists and people from the media, journalists, they were concerned on a real-time basis about the use of the ruse and the narrative that the Proud Boys were here in early June during the Chop Chaz situation. I said in my beginning remarks that Chief Diaz here, who I've had some discussions with, because the affected employees still have Loudermill rights and there's still a process by which they are guaranteed a fair and impartial determination as to the findings that Andrew Meyerberg issued, that I, as the person he reports to, I can't do anything according to the law that would influence his ability to be impartial, anything but impartial and fair. So if I directed him to say something or I said something that would suggest otherwise, that would be inappropriate. So I won't do that, but I will tell you this, that this concept, particularly coming from your level and those close under you, that I didn't know, beats me. That's not what they're saying, but it's sort of, I get that impression that that there's no place for that in the Harrell administration. If you didn't know, you should know. And if I'm going to lead this city and lead our department, and I'm going to talk about building community trust and transparency, then I cannot have that attitude. Because quite frankly, when I talk about diversity, this is what diversity looks like to me. It just doesn't look like those standing around me and those that are helping lead the city. It looks like diversity of thought, where someone could simply say, you know, I have a different opinion on that. Maybe we want to do this, okay? That's what diversity looks like to me. Now, I'm not commenting on whether that occurred or not because I wasn't there at that particular time, but I will talk about what will occur under our administration. The number one, we will, working with the council, we will look at what procedures need to be fixed, what processes need to be changed. We do know that the use of ruses or the dissemination of falsehoods or the, well, I could call them lies. I mean, I'm known for my candor, whatever, however you want to describe it, whatever euphemism you'd like to use, that they have their place in good police work often, particularly in internet crimes against children and other types of operations. And so there's a lawful use of this tool. There can also be, in certain situations, hypothetically, situations where it is abused or misused. Just wasn't a smart use of the ruse. So we are going to work collectively with under Councilmember Herbold's leadership and the council and the police department to figure out what that process looks like to make sure that this kind of situation under my administration doesn't occur. And again, if I'm going to be open with the city, as I only know how to be, when I read Andrew Meyerberg's 19-page report, which I did, when I hear people saying they didn't know, it seemed to me that if you didn't know, you weren't following the news. Because I read about the Proud Boys afoot. I read about it. And if I were in a position of authority, I would have said, this is me. I would have said, well, my goodness, how many are there? Where are they? What are they armed with? What are they about to do? Logistically, give me some logistics. That is a logical inquiry into that kind of information. This is your mayor talking to you. That's how I will approach this if I hear information like that. I've had discussions with Chief Diaz, and I want to use my words very carefully here. He was honest enough and transparent enough to simply say, sometime after he heard about the Proud Boys and he heard it was a ruse. That's leadership. And what I'm trying to impress upon our department, now we do have the benefit, I know that's a dangling sentence, let me come back to that. We have to value transparency. And what I'm trying to press upon my department, that if you make a misstep, you know, we have the benefit of looking at this a long time after the fact. You know, at that point, Chop Chaz, there was no indication whether it's going to be 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. We did not know. We did not know lives were going to be lost as a city. When I use the word we did not know it would be what it became. But if you use poor judgment, say it. This is the decision I made at a particular time based on the data that I had. In hindsight, perhaps that was a misstep. That's what we will do. I'm not promising you perfection in what we do. I'm promising you transparency and honesty. If after the fact you use poor judgment, say it. It's not that hard to do. In fact, I said it this morning. Not to you all, I said it to my kids. You make a mistake, just say it, just own it. And you learn. Under the Harrell administration, we're going to build trust with our community such that if we start looking at some of the problems we have around 12th and Jackson as an example, that we know we're going in with an honest approach, not criminalizing poverty, just trying to keep people safe. So for me, the issue of the ruse is not to second guess right now for me. That would be inappropriate for me to say whether it was proper or improper. The propriety or impropriety of that action should not be discussed by any of us. There's a legal process for that. But I could tell you what we're going to do going forward. We're going to be honest. And again, I'm going to close this part and relinquish the microphone to Councilmember Herbold. And I don't know what she's going to say because we didn't script. There was a time where I didn't know what Councilmember Herbold would say. We'd work together. But Mr. Salisbury, again, I want to thank you. I know this has been traumatic for you. I know that you were looking for answers. I don't even know if the answers were to your satisfaction. But I will tell you, this is what journalism and tenacity and a commitment to many communities looks like in my eyes, at least. So I want to thank you publicly and thank you for being here. And with that, I introduce you to Public Safety Chair and friend, Councilmember Lisa Herbold.
Thank you. Thanks. We did not coordinate our remarks, but that is because I'm really pleased that the role that Mayor Harrell has already taken on this issue, as well as Senior Deputy Mayor Harrell in participating in my committee discussion, and I had a lot of faith and trust based on those interactions already and comments made publicly about the severity and need to address this issue, that I felt comfortable coming up and sharing my remarks without knowing exactly what Mayor Harrell was going to say. So thank you to Mayor Harrell for his attention to this issue, and that, again, of Senior Deputy Mayor in participating in the discussion in the Public Safety and Human Services Committee yesterday. We also owe gratitude to the independent journalists for this misinformation campaign coming to light in the first place. Moving forward, I believe we must focus on two issues. First, how to increase oversight of the use of ruses, which are, as we've said, currently legal under state law. And if ruses are to be used as a tactic at all, they need additional oversight, and they must be documented to ensure that they are only used when the law permits them to be used in a way that does not, as the law states, shock the conscience. The Proud Boy ruse was found inconsistent with SPD policy, and I'd argue in violation of state law because it certainly did shock the conscience of folks hearing that Proud Boys were assembling in our city. But again, we only know this because of independent journalists uncovering the ruse, not because it was documented, not because there was oversight of the documentation of the use of the tactic. Secondly, there's the critical issue of public trust. The OPA report concluded that the mention of potentially armed Proud Boys did result in fear and alarm among community members. In yesterday's committee meeting, the OPA director suggested that we should, in policy, distinguish between ruses in the context of criminal investigations versus what we saw in this instance, a ruse for the purpose of a disinformation campaign. So despite state law making ruses legal, Inspector General Judge has called for a renewed look at their efficacy, given the negative impact dishonesty in any form can have on public trust. We know that the Office of the Inspector General's Sentinel Review Panel, this is an effort that was started some time ago. We've already have a set of recommendations coming out of what they call their first wave, and that's only the first 4 days of the George Floyd protests from May 29th to June 1st. That resulted in 50 recommendations. We know that the Sentinel Review Panel, which is led by the Inspector General as well as community members and members of the police department, that they are going to review the use of this ruse in an upcoming review. But nevertheless, I'm relieved that we're not waiting for these recommendations and that the Inspector General, the Mayor's office, and others are working with the police department now on policy changes to address the concerns raised by these cases. But ultimately, I believe that just like the state legislature is considering changes, there's a hearing coming up, I think, on the 14th. They're considering legislation to make statements from an interrogation inadmissible if the court determines that the officer intentionally engaged in deception in obtaining the statement, a practice that is currently legal. They're considering making those types of statements inadmissible. I think we too should consider whether Seattle should prohibit disinformation efforts altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Herbold, for those words and for being so perfectly granular in the approach, because this is good policy work, and that's what the City Council does. Thank you very much, Councilmember Herbold. Okay, I'll field a few questions if you have on either of the topics, and fire away. Yes, sir.
Mayor Harrell, will you or potentially Deputy Mayor Harrell be able to expand on the difference between the Deputy Mayor's role in the public safety sphere and Andrew Meyerberg, who's the public safety director?
Sure. So, Deputy Mayor Harrell has a portfolio of police, fire, OPA work, and as a senior deputy mayor. But let me speak specifically about Andrew Meyerberg, because we announced that this morning or yesterday. When did we announce it?
Yesterday.
Yesterday, okay. When they didn't tell me in this job, everything just sort of blends in. It's like one long week. So what we want is someone that knows police accountability, knows police reform, to field a lot of the situations on a real-time basis. There's an unfortunate shooting. There's something that creates public safety. To say the word liaison is just an underutilization of that title, but to really be nimble for our department to know exactly what we must do from a mayoral standpoint and from a cabinet standpoint, what to do, and then working closely with Director of Strategic Initiatives Tim Burgess and Director of Policy Dan Eder, what policies, if any, need to be changed. To play a role, again, sort of parlaying his accountability background with a need for effective public safety, to be right in that sweet spot, to look at what officers did, what they could have done differently, or to be able to handle you all, members of the press and community leaders, in terms of dealing with what could have been done more effectively. So it's a director of public safety position, but it certainly covers a gambit of the needs we see to act on a real-time basis for things that occur.
Will he play a role in negotiations with police?
That is one part of his responsibilities. Thank you for giving me the answer I should have given you directly and more concisely. Yes.
Mayor, can you restate the question and give it to folks online or have it?
Sure. Thank you. So, and the question was, describe sort of the relationship between Deputy Mayor Harrell and Andrew Meyerberg, sort of their responsibilities in their varying capacities. And I'll try to report it. Chris?
I can appreciate that you're being careful with the language, and this is an odd question to ask with the chief standing right there, but you seem to allude to the fact that the chief knew about this ruse. When did he know it?
So the question was, when did I alluded to the fact that the chief knew the ruse. Do I have to do this every time, Jamie? Is this, I feel like a reporter now. Okay. So the question was, when did the chief know about the ruse? And I think that was basically the question. So let me be careful, because again, I'm under some legal parameters. Based on my knowledge, the conversation that we had, it was not like the next day or the next day after. I mean, this was some time ago, right? But shortly after. Shortly after, and by that I mean maybe perhaps a few days or so.
So is there a problem that it took 18 months for that piece of information to come out, that the chief knew about the ruse?
So I want to make it clear, he was not the chief,
Correct.
okay? In fact, his responsibilities were quite different then in terms of having direct input there. In fact, there was, of course, former Chief Best was the chief, and I think Mahaffey was in a role there, and they were interviewed. And I think your question now, Chris, is about the gap of time by which it had come out. So again, let me just give you my opinion on the gap of time, because I don't think that jeopardizes the Loudermill rights of the affected employees. Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. In fact, it would seem to me that if we look at the history of violence in this country, we look at the chilling effect that the mentioning of the Proud Boys has on certain communities, in particular the black community. When we look at just the issue of violence that has occurred in the city, that's unacceptable. To my point, Chris, is that I would have thought that someone would have said, you know, we need to explain to the city some of our tactics. We need to be smarter than that. That's why I'm very intentional about calling out Mr. Salisbury, because it should not take his doggedness to bring this issue to light. And I think Councilmember Herbold sort of shares that concern. If I learn never to speak for anyone else, but I hope we share that concern. That's startling for me, that I don't have, on the same breath I'm talking about to the police department, help me build trust. Communities don't trust you. I'm dealing with an issue right now. I'm sorry, Jamie, I'm riffing, and he hates when I riff. I'm dealing with an issue right now in schools, public safety in schools. Our young students are frightened in many ways. And when many of them are saying they don't want police in schools, some of them are saying because they don't trust the police. That's a different high school than I attended, because my high school coach, one of my high school coaches, was a police officer. So when we talk about trying to rebuild trust, that's what it looks like. A chief saying, hey, I found out about this stuff. Might not have been the smartest thing to condone or enable, but I found out about it. Maybe I took a left turn, should have taken a right turn. And I've told Chief Diaz, if we are to work together, that's the kind of transparency he has to accept, because that's the mayor that I will be. So yes, it is problematic for me, this gap of time. Absolutely. Omar. Omar.
Yeah, is Chief Diaz available? Can you answer the question?
Sort of, and let me ask you this. So we were under some restrictions. I asked him just to be here so he could hear how I'm talking about. But
it's fine. I mean, I'll ask you. I know you're new on the job, but I'll just throw it out here. I mean, basically, are you guys here satisfied with the level of detail that's in this OPA report? We talk about the time that it took to come out. People didn't realize that the investigation started officially January 3rd and was stamped by OIG September 10th. A big reason why it took so long is you had a lot of officers who, it was very difficult for the investigator. And you know, they did not make it easy for the investigator. They made themselves unavailable for the investigator, and there's so many empty holes that are in the OPA report. Andrew Meyerberg referenced that, yeah, the report is as complete as it could be based upon the information that officers are willing to give. There's a lot of questions that are still out there. You know, are you guys looking to further investigate, to fill in the gaps on this? I mean, there's also rumblings that there might be other communication that's out there. Now, the other thing is my understanding is there's still a few more protest cases that are in OPA. How big of it is a priority for you guys to get these protest cases out and done? So 3-4 months from now, depending upon what's in those cases, we're not all back here again. How big of a priority is it to just get this protest stuff out?
So That's a direct question. I'll try my best to give you a direct answer, and I'll, Chief, I'll take the question. And I asked Councilmember Herbold as a policy leader if she wants to respond as well. So I do know that Andrew Meyerberg, with, I don't know, 18,000 cases, how many cases there were, that office, with the resources they had, were doing the best they could under that situation. I read the report for the first time last night. I had questions. I could tell you some of the questions that I had. So I'm working with my team to figure out what our strategy will be to get some of the questions that I have that are unanswered, given that. I mean, we also know there's a recent history of how ruses were used. I don't want to talk about the recent histories. They've been used, I don't think anyone has really, from the city of Seattle, has really just did a stop and say what damage was there done on Chop Chaz, not just with the ruse, but other issues, other factual inquiries that need to be made. We know lives were lost. I've personally talked to family members whose lives were lost. So yes, we are looking at other inquiries, and so I can't answer it directly because I just read the report yesterday. I haven't met my team on it. Councilmember Herbold may have something to say on that question.
Sure, just a little bit here. There are definitely unanswered questions arising from this investigation. The Office of the Inspector General has certified the investigation as complete, and I can share with anybody who's interested the process that they go through and the questions that they ask in order to determine completeness. But I think one of the things that we need to ask ourselves is, are the questions that we have knowable? Are the answers knowable to those questions? And I think that gets to sort of the policy issues that we've raised about the need to document, just like all uses of force. Police officers have to document their uses of force so that then you have information to determine whether or not that use of force was within policy. There was no documentation, and so as you know, they literally had to identify the officers involved in the ruse by listening to the recordings and determining whose voice that was. And so there is undoubtedly there are unanswered questions, but the issue that I keep coming back to is, are the answers to those questions knowable? That said, I have offered to my colleagues on the council to collect questions that are unanswered thus far, and I extend the same invitation to members of the public to seek the answers for any questions that we continue to have about this particular investigation.
With all due respect, I would just say that 90% of the answers are knowable because the answers reside within current officers at the SPD and former officers at the SPD. The reason why it's not knowable is because they haven't been forthcoming with the information.
Mm-hmm. And I think the question of whether or not the answers that we are receiving are truthful answers is another legitimate question. I don't know if asking those same officers questions in another way is going to necessarily produce different results, though. I'm committed to looking at information that hasn't already been collected, or asking that there be a continued inquiry of either existing officers who have already participated in interviews and provided their answers to questions, or identifying new questions for those officers or other officers who haven't been identified.
There's a question from Doug on the screen. We have time for a couple more questions.
And I wanted to make another point, Omar, if I may. One of the challenges we have with the old system, and you'll see our work in police reform in this regard, is when officers are investigating other officers, that's problematic for us, okay? That's why we will push for more civilian investigators, many of whom will be very skilled at cross-examination techniques and pulling the information out and reading between the lines such that we can get at the truth. I see King 5 here, they stand for the truth. We stand for the truth as well. So this notion of investigators, or rather police investigating themselves, we're taking a hard look at. You'll likely see some changes. Jamie, do you mind calling on, should I just, yes?
Yeah,
Oh, but I think I'm
sorry.
sorry. Question from the screen. Yes. Doug Trum. We can
On
hear,
this line of, can you hear me?
we can, Doug.
Great. On this line of thought, questioning, I'm just taking it a little bit farther. The captain who took most of the blame for this ruse ended up being promoted, and that was Chief Bess, I believe, at the time. Did she know about that when she promoted him, and he remained assistant chief for the better part of a year? Was the understanding then that this was, not a big deal, or how did he stay in that position?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Doug. My short answer is I don't know, and to Omari's points, that's one of the questions that I think people would like to know. I've not had direct conversations with her on this issue at all, and I don't know if that fell within the scope of Andrew Meyerberg's report, so I don't know the answer to that, Doug. I'll go here and I'll come here. Yes.
Thank you for your time here. My question is, can you just make it clear what you're expecting from SPD moving forward on their use of ruses? Because like you said, some of them are legitimate. It's a child porn investigation. But then, of course, on this extreme, we have the Proud Boys ruse. So just spelling out and making it clear in the future what you're expecting from SPD and the chief.
Yeah, good question. So I'll make it clear what I expect, what the specific policy recommendations are as the work we're doing now with the council. So number one, what I expect is that any type of ruse sort of goes through a reality check. Is it a smart thing to do? Is it consistent with state law? Are there the right people in the decision-making room to give us that diversity of thought? If you have just groupthink, that is a bad thing. So I need to make sure that they have a system by which you don't just have rank and file or one solo person making a decision that could be as audacious as the one we saw in this particular situation, number one. Number two, is there any type of legal review as an example? Is there a form? Is there a process by which we are even doing checks? Is there a record, if you will, as Councilmember Herbold pointed out, is who approved it? When does it make sense? We don't have any of that information. How high did it go up? Because I want, there again, if you look at the history of ruses in this country, of misinformation and getting 5 people to frame another person, misinformation, the mass incarceration of certain peoples. You look at the history of how our judicial system has been abused. The use of tactics like this has to come from the top. And so again, did we lose everyone there?
No, they're still there.
Oh. Again, and I'm not afraid to mention the abandonment of the East Precinct. I will if you don't. When we hear repeatedly, I didn't make the decision, it didn't come to me, well, why didn't it? That's the questions, Omari, those are the questions we want to ask. Why didn't it? And I've had discussions with Chief Diaz where we will improve that. Those are our values, those are policies, and we'll come up with specific recommendations here in a very timely way. I'm going to come over here and I'll come back, okay?
One on the screen is from Jennifer Henningsen from the Seattle Times.
Okay. Where's your box? Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Mayor. If it's okay for me to ask a slightly unrelated question about public safety, I'm curious to know, Mayor and Chief Diaz, what you're doing about the commercial drug sales on 3rd between Pike and Pine and the fencing of stolen goods on 3rd between Lenora and Virginia. And then I have a follow-up for Councilmember Herbold, if that's all right.
So on this particular press conference, and I'm turning to you, Jamie, it's not my first one, I've had a few. I'm trying to sort of keep it on these core areas. Chief, you could sort of come to me if you want to address that in specifically. Maybe you could hum a few bars, but I am trying to stay on this just for this particular morning.
Our staff can follow up with Jennifer.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jennifer, we're happy to connect too with more in-depth answers if needed.
Okay.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. We'll
And then, Councilmember Herbold, have you met with City Attorney Ann Davison yet? And if so, how did that go?
I did. We met As Mayor Harrell said, things seem to meld together. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before. I think it was probably last week. Yeah, we just had an agreement to continue regular meetings to discuss issues that are in her purview as well as in my Public Safety and Human Services Committee. And I think the issue that we discussed most was the city attorney's focus on the misdemeanor case backlog, and she gave me a heads up that they were bringing in a consultant to help advise them on that.
We have time for about 2 more questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Herbold.
Sure.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I think that there's, some folks are a bit surprised that there isn't more talk about just banning ruses altogether, given that police have been shown that they can't be trusted with this kind of power, and that they shouldn't be allowed to spread any kind of misinformation or lies. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, just to repeat the question, whether we are considering or should it be considered just to ban ruses altogether as a tactic, given some of the problems that they've caused. So I don't know the answer to that one. I don't know when it has been used effectively to really prosecute a person that should be prosecuted. I do know where it's been abused and misused. So we have an open mind. I'm going to talk to state legislators as well, not just for the city of Seattle. So we have an open mind as to whether they should be abandoned altogether or whether there's limited exceptions that they should be used. So I don't know the answer to that. And again, I will have to defer to some experts, some criminologists, some prosecutors, some defense attorneys, and have a discussion. So I don't think it would be appropriate for me just to knee-jerk and say they have to go away together. I just don't know the data on that.
So it is something though that you would consider?
Well, my answer, I just gave you my answer. I said I'll consider all. I don't want to, and I didn't mean to be terse. There's nothing I won't consider, but I don't know if that's a smart policy to ban them all together. I just don't know that. Would you think that banning them, is that your position, that we should just ban them all together?
I mean, I think there's a lot of people wondering about it, considering how outraged they are about what just happened.
Yeah.
It's the first time a recent contact back with
Yeah.
TV,
So, and I've also been told that particularly crimes against children for predators, that they have been effectively used sometimes. So there could be limited exceptions where they're used effectively. And again, I just don't know. And I apologize for not knowing. I will know. And so I've also been told there have been times where they have done what they're supposed to do. We know that in this current situation how volatile it was. And so a complete blanket on ruses, quite frankly, I don't even know if a city has the ability to do that. That could be inconsistent with state law. So longer conversations, I'm certainly willing to have those conversations.
May I?
Yes.
And I just want to restate what I have said a couple times. The Office of the Inspector General Judge has raised that question, and is calling for a renewed discussion of whether or not ruses are appropriate in any circumstance. And in my comments, I did say that I think it's worth considering, and I noted that the state legislature has a bill that one type of ruse, a ruse is sort of identified as sort of the exceptions to the honesty policy. And one of those exceptions currently is not being truthful in the course of an interview of a suspect. That is one of the things that the state legislature, that is a type of ruse, and that is one of the things that the state legislature is considering making that information admissible. So that is an example of the state legislature considering regulating or limiting the use of a type of ruse. The OPA director also urged us to think of ruses that are used as tactics in crowd control situations differently than other kinds of ruses, because it's more of a misinformation campaign rather than a one-on-one deception. And I think in raising the question of whether or not ruses in being used as a tactic in a crowd control situation should be dealt with differently, that again, I think underscores that question of whether or not they should be prohibited at all.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for the question, because I heard the question, should they just be completely abolished under any and all circumstances? And I said, I consider that, but I don't know if, I don't have the information if that's the best way to go at this point, but that's the work we're going to do. Thank you. Last question, yes. Thank you for patience, too.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for taking some questions and talking about the trust that was broken. You pretty clearly said how you feel that this incident did harm community trust. I'm wondering if we might be able to hear from Chief Diaz. I know your ability to comment on the situation is very limited, but Mayor Harrell has made it really clear what he's hoping to see from the police department in this continued partnership moving forward to rebuild some of this broken trust. So Chief Diaz, are you able to talk a little bit about the police department's intent under your leadership to work with Mayor Harrell to rebuild some of this broken trust?
Yeah. And as he approaches the microphone, and I ask him to approach the microphone, again, I'll just make a disclaimer that he will be in a position here for, I think, 30 days to be a fair and impartial arbiter of the recommendations. And so with that, those parameters, certainly you could feel free to say a few words.
Please. So thank you. Thank you for that question, and thank you for allowing me to say a couple words. I know that I do have some limitations in it, but what we saw a year and a half ago, while I wasn't the chief at the time, was very traumatizing to the community. It had a lot of impacts, and I have to apologize for those impacts that we created. I've been committed over that whole course of time to revamping everything from policies to training to ensuring that our officers are doing the right thing. It has been a long process in that. I also have to make sure that my command staff is also making the right decisions and that they're doing the right thing. And that has also, over the last year and a half, has been a process in itself. And I am, committed to ensuring that we build trust. It is a long road to build trust. I've had to, make sure that everything has been put in order over the last year and a half as far as, our crowd management response. We've made those adjustments. It was unacceptable a year and a half ago of how we were responding. And now we've actually come to a much better place where we're not finding ourselves using force, where we're not using crowd control weapons, that we're finding ourselves in a better place where when an action of criminal activity gets addressed, that we're handling it in the right manner. And now the other component is ensuring that I build trust. We've been setting up real reconciliation sessions, listening sessions, learning from community about how we can, restore that trust. It is going to be a long process, but I am committed to making sure that we do that. And it's not just from the top, but it's the whole department. It is not just, the chief being the eyes and ears of the department. It is literally every officer making sure that they are doing the right thing, that they are building, that they're the community relations officer, that they're also the officer that's going to go out and handle and respond to an active shooter. I need to make sure that all of my officers are generalists, that they go out and do the work as a community police officer. And that is what we're moving towards in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mayor Harrell.
Yes.
My apologies. I just got this confirmed and authenticated here, and I can probably share with everybody here in a minute later on. I have an email here that's from June 8th, 2020, and it's from Chad Belcher, the SBU Emergency Management. And he says, this is on June 8th at 6:39 p.m. Hi all, I was asked by EOC Director Kenneth Nafasi and Seattle Police for this information not to be distributed further than for operational needs. SPD is preparing for possible counter-protester at Volunteer Park that could lead to significant volatility in the area. Intelligence reports the Proud Boys group may be active in the area. SDOT, SPU, and other departments have been working this afternoon to make the area as safe as possible by clearing dumpsters, adjusting barricades, flammable material. Sir, this email right here is communication between Seattle Police Department, the EOC, and then the EOC now talking to SPU to tell SPU that there's a threat of the Proud Boys at 6:40 on June 8th. This now is very counter to what Grennan talked about saying, hey, I just kind of made it up, bro, you know, kind of did my thing and everything else. There's also, this email wasn't in the OPA report, sir. And, you know, I sat here, I wasn't going to say anything until I could get it confirmed, because, you know, we don't want to just put something out there. I'm sorry to be dramatic in your press conference, but this just came out. There's no better place than the president. But this shows right here that it seems like different city departments might have even been fooled by the hoax. SPU's over there, people are making emergency plans. I don't know. I'm just letting you know. I just got this confirmed right now that these people were talking. This is much bigger than just Grennan and what he was saying.
Sure. So let me respond. Thank you for the real-time journalism. A few things. One is, a couple of days ago, I was at the Office of Emergency Management talking to its director and its assistant director and many of the staff employees there, and I was there with my team, and we asked the question, did you know there was a ruse going on? As you may recall, the OEM was activated. We asked that question, was it activated during Chop Chaz? It was activated as a crisis situation, as an emergency situation. And they said they did not know there was a ruse, which then, in our inquiry, raises some issues, that if they are making tactical decisions based on false information, that is problematic, certainly going to be problematic with our administration, to your point. So we were there for other reasons, to make sure that in case of an earthquake, in case of other situations, that we are prepared as a city. But in that orientation and training and information sharing, we asked the question about the ruse because that is near and dear to us. And so we also are aware of the fact that there was deployment decisions. That is problematic. So I agree with you, number one. Number two, and I didn't mention this in my opening remarks, that I became aware that even Councilmember Herbold had asked, I think directly, the chief, I believe, hey, we're hearing about the Proud Boys. What's going on here? It didn't say that, but it was that was the gist of it. And I think you had a few text messages, and I don't think you received a response. Or I don't know if you...
Not via text, but we had a conversation.
You had a conversation, and so, so when regional people were trying to inquire about what we're reading on the news, we don't know the dissemination and the ripple effect of bad information. So I look forward to having, like I said, there are many questions that I had when I read the 19-page report. So more to come. The report was issued yesterday, and again, it raised many flags. So thank you very much, Omari, for that. And I think with that, I want to thank you. We're going to close down this conference. Thank you very much for your questions, and everyone try to have a good day, all things considered. Make it a great day. One Seattle.